A lot of restaurant chains are not losing people because Americans suddenly stopped liking burgers, wings, pancakes, pizza, or seafood. They are losing people because the old deal feels broken. The promise used to be simple: pay for convenience, get a meal that feels dependable, filling, and at least a little fun. But industry data now shows a squeeze from both sides. In 2024, U.S. chain restaurant sales grew just 3.1%, while menu price inflation ran at 4.1%. And the American Customer Satisfaction Index showed quick service restaurant satisfaction stuck at 79, while full service slipped to 82. That is the heart of this whole list. People are not just complaining about price. They are saying the food and the experience no longer feel strong enough to justify the bill. By the end of this video, you will know which warning signs matter most before nostalgia tricks you into paying for a memory instead of a meal. IHOP comes in at number 15 because it still wins on familiarity. But familiarity only carries you so far when the plate feels more routine than special. The American Customer Satisfaction Index scored it at 78 in 2025, well below the full-service average of 82. On top of that, its domestic comparable same-restaurant sales fell 1.5% in the third quarter of 2025, before barely edging up 0.3% in the fourth quarter. That is not a collapse. It is something more subtle and, in some ways, more damaging. It suggests a brand that can still pull people in, but is having a harder time making them feel excited once they get there. Pancakes are supposed to be an easy pleasure. Breakfast for dinner is supposed to feel generous, comforting, and a little indulgent. The trouble is that when a chain built on comforting basics starts to feel merely adequate, the customer starts doing quiet math. Are the eggs cooked right? Are the hash browns crisp? Does the coffee feel fresh? Is the portion still comforting enough to feel like a treat instead of a transaction? That is where not worth it anymore usually begins. Not with one giant failure. With too many small meals that feel forgettable. And that is especially dangerous for a chain whose whole identity depends on people feeling warmer at the end of the meal than they did walking in. Applebee's lands at number 14 because it is one of the clearest examples of a chain living off muscle memory. The full-service average in the American Customer Satisfaction Index was 82 in 2025. It scored 80. That is not awful, but it is not where a chain built on easy neighborhood comfort wants to live. In the fourth quarter of 2025, domestic comparable same-restaurant sales slipped 0.4%. And while the brand did improve from a rougher 2024, that is part of the controversy here. A lot of chains now celebrate stabilization as if it were the same thing as renewed love. It is not. A brand can stop bleeding and still not feel worth the check. That matters for a place that built its reputation on casual abundance. The whole point was supposed to be that the food felt bigger than the price and easier than thinking. But once diners start asking whether the appetizers, burgers, chicken plates, and sides feel obviously better than cheaper options, the spell breaks. The dangerous habit with Applebee's is ordering from memory. People remember the old mood, the old late-night crowd, the old sense that you could get a lot of food without overthinking it. What they are often reacting to now is not one shocking failure. It is the sense that the experience no longer has enough margin for error. When quality feels only decent, service feels only decent, and the total lands higher than expected. Good enough suddenly feels expensive. Buffalo Wild Wings sits at number 13 because sports bar logic only works when the food arrives like it matters. In 2025, the American Customer Satisfaction Index dropped at 4% to 76, one of the weakest scores among the full-service chains it tracks and well below the category average of 82. That is a red flag because the brand is not selling wings alone. It is selling a whole package. Screens everywhere, big game energy, shareable food, loud, easy fun. When that formula works, people forgive a lot. When it slips, people stop being generous fast. Wings are one of the worst foods to get wrong because customers notice every shortcut immediately. If they are not hot enough, crisp enough, sauced well enough, or portioned well enough, the whole meal starts feeling like a markup exercise. That is the hidden problem with a lot of legacy chains right now. The dining room may still look energetic, but the plate has to do real work. Customers are much less willing than they used to be to pay premium casual prices for food that feels like it came out average on a very average night. And when the core product is something people can compare bite for bite, piece for piece, and dollar for dollar, the tolerance gets even lower. A sports bar can survive slow service once in a while. It can survive a noisy room. It can survive a crowded game night. What it cannot survive forever is the feeling that the food is now the weak link in the whole reason for going. Sonic comes in at number 12 because inconsistency is poison when the entire pitch is fun. In the American Customer Satisfaction Index, it fell 4% in 2025 to 73, one of the lowest quick service scores on the board and far below the quick service average of 79. That score captures the real issue. This is a chain people do not visit only for hunger. They visit for novelty, drinks, snacks, nostalgia, and a drive-in format that is supposed to feel different from the standard fast food drill. But the more playful the concept, the less forgiving customers become when the execution does not keep up. The food does not need to be fancy. It needs to be reliable, hot, and satisfying enough that the trip feels like a treat and not a regret. Once diners start expecting a dice roll on freshness, speed, or order accuracy, the novelty stops helping. It starts hurting. Because then the question becomes brutal. Why did I go out of my way for this? That is what makes chains like this vulnerable. A plain burger place can survive on speed. A coffee place can survive on habit. A drive-in that sells indulgence has to make indulgence feel worth the stop. When the customer walks away thinking the best part was the menu board idea and not the meal itself, the brand is in trouble. Low satisfaction numbers do not prove every visit is bad. They do show that too many people are leaving without the old sense of payoff. Burger King lands at number 11 because this is what a long rebuild looks like when the public can still feel the before and after at the same time. In the American Customer Satisfaction Index, it scored 77 in 2025, below the quick service average. And the company itself has effectively admitted that the guest experience needed major work. Restaurant Brands International announced in 2024 that Burger King would pour another $300 million into remodeling on top of earlier investments, to get 85 to 90% of its U.S. restaurants to a modern image by 2028. That is not a minor refresh. That is an acknowledgement that too much of the system no longer felt current enough. The brand is not dead. In fact, its U.S. comparable sales were up in the fourth quarter of 2025. But that does not erase the perception problem. A chain can improve on paper while millions of customers still carry the memory of limp fries, sloppy assembly, or dining rooms that felt tired long after the commercials moved on. The controversial part is that people often judge Burger King on brand mythology. They remember the flame-grilled pitch and assume that should be enough. It is not. Fast food lives and dies on execution. If the sandwich is built badly, if the fries lag, if the store looks dated, the whole premium around the signature burger starts collapsing. Remodeling campaigns matter because they tell you what companies already know. Customers do not just buy the item, they buy the confidence that the item will come out right. For years, too many people stopped feeling that confidence here. Panera Bread takes number 10, because it may be the cleanest example on this list of a chain learning the hard way that quiet cost-cutting can wreck perceived quality even before the menu looks dramatically different. In the American Customer Satisfaction Index, it scored 79 in 2025, down from 80 and right at the industry average rather than above it. Then, in late 2025, the company unveiled a transformation strategy called Panera Rise that explicitly promised to reclaim industry leadership and drive transaction growth by investing in food quality and cafe experience. That wording matters. Companies do not put food quality and cafe experience at the center of a rescue plan unless customers have been telling them something is off. The controversy around this chain is that many people once treated it as the safe middle ground between fast food and sit-down dining. Better bread, better soups, better sandwiches, better cafe feel. Once that gap narrows, the price starts looking a lot less flattering. This is how trust erodes. Not necessarily because one item becomes terrible, but because the overall meal stops feeling carefully made. Smaller feeling value, less warmth in the room, more self-service, less human touch, and food that no longer feels like it earns the premium. That is a brutal combination for a brand built on the opposite idea. When a chain has to launch a major plan to win back traffic and explicitly reinvest in the basics that customers already thought they were paying for, that tells you the old formula drifted too far. Subway comes in at number 9 because shrinkage on this scale does not happen by accident. In 2025, the American Customer Satisfaction Index put it at 76, still below the quick service average. At the same time, Subway lost a net 631 U.S. restaurants in 2024, finishing with 19,502 domestic locations, the first time it had dropped below 20,000 in about 2 decades. Even more telling, reporting from restaurant trade outlets showed its share of the sub-sandwich market had fallen by 21% over 5 years, and its U.S. same-store sales were down 1.1%. That is not one bad quarter. That is a long erosion story. The problem with Subway is that it used to win so easily on one simple feeling: smarter fast food, fresh enough to feel lighter, custom enough to feel personal, cheap enough to feel easy. But when rivals close the quality gap or beat you on ingredients, bread, value, or speed, the old advantage evaporates. Then customers start noticing everything else. The bread does not feel as special. The meats and toppings do not feel as differentiated. The stores do not always feel inviting enough to justify the stop. A chain can survive being plain. What it cannot survive forever is being plain while people still remember when it seemed like a category leader. That is why Subway frustrates people. The disappointment is not just about the sandwich in front of them. It is about the gap between what the brand once represented and what the average visit now feels like. Denny's takes number 8 because once a diner chain starts closing restaurants to fix flagging sales, customers hear the message even if they never read the investor presentation. In 2025, the American Customer Satisfaction Index scored it at 75, the lowest among the full-service names on its main list. In October of 2024, the company said it would close 150 of its lowest-performing restaurants by the end of 2025, with the Associated Press noting the chain was dealing with declining sales and a 5th straight quarter of year-over-year sales drops. That is the business side. The customer side is even more revealing. Denny's is not supposed to be complicated. It is supposed to be dependable. Open late. Big menu. Easy breakfast. Easy burgers. Easy comfort food. But diner concepts are brutally exposed when the food starts feeling more like a commodity than a comfort. If the eggs, pancakes, coffee, fries, and skillet meals do not feel warm, plentiful, and properly cooked, there is nowhere to hide. The whole appeal is emotional. You go because you want the kind of meal that smooths out the day, not a meal that makes you think about margins. The controversial truth is that a lot of legacy chains suffer when they stop feeling generous. Diners forgive basic food. They do not forgive basic food at a price that no longer feels diner-like. Once customers suspect the chain is cutting back while asking them to pay like nothing changed, the brand starts losing the one thing it cannot easily buy back: instinctive trust. Papa John's comes in at number 7 because the pizza business is ruthless when customers no longer believe the quality story. In the American Customer Satisfaction Index, it sat at 79 in 2025, tied near the top of the pizza subcategory. That might sound solid until you look at the business stress. In the fourth quarter of 2025, North America comparable sales fell 5%. Then, the company announced plans to close about 300 underperforming North American restaurants by the end of 2027, with many of those closures expected in 2026. That tells you something important. Satisfaction scores can stay decent while the real business underneath is still under pressure. Pizza chains live on repetition. Families reorder. Workplaces reorder. Late-night customers reorder. When that habit weakens, it usually means the product is no longer beating the easier alternatives strongly enough. For this brand, the old premium pitch was never subtle. The whole idea was that the pizza should taste like a step above. But that kind of positioning is fragile. If the crust, cheese balance, sauce, or consistency start feeling too average, customers immediately start asking whether the premium is still real or just historical branding. And pizza is a dangerous category for that because everybody has a reference point. Grocery pizza, local pizza, delivery apps, frozen pizza, everybody compares. When a national chain starts closing hundreds of units while talking about transformation, that is not just a real estate story. It is a demand story. And demand gets weaker when people stop believing the food is distinctly worth coming back for. Pizza Hut lands at number 6 because it may be the most visible reminder that being big is not the same thing as feeling relevant. The American Customer Satisfaction Index scored it at 79 in 2025, which looks respectable until you place it next to what happened next. In early 2026, the Associated Press reported that Pizza Hut planned to close 250 underperforming U.S. restaurants in the first half of the year after its U.S. same-store sales fell 5% in 2025. Reporting around the same period also noted that the brand was in a strategic review and that its sales problems in the United States were dragging on. This chain once defined pizza night for huge parts of the country. That is exactly why the decline hits harder. People are not just judging the current pie. They are judging it against an old emotional standard. The old dine-in rooms, the big pan identity, the sense that this was the event pizza, not the backup pizza. When that magic weakens, the food gets judged with less mercy. The crust has to feel right. The cheese has to feel satisfying. The whole meal has to beat the easier alternatives in more than one way. If it does not, customers start asking a very blunt question. Why am I paying delivery chain prices for pizza that no longer feels iconic? That is why outdated stores matter. That is why strategic reviews matter. And that is why so many people now talk about this brand as something they used to love rather than something they still actively choose. KFC takes number 5 because the quality warning here is unusually direct. In 2025, the American Customer Satisfaction Index dropped at 5% to 77, one of the sharpest declines in the quick service survey. The ACSI press release said it was facing competitors that were adapting to shifting preferences more quickly, and reporting on the study noted that customer assessments of both menu variety and food quality had declined substantially. That is the kind of sentence no legacy food brand wants attached to its name. Fried chicken is unforgiving. Customers know immediately when the coating is wrong, the texture is off, the seasoning does not hit, or the sides feel generic. And when a chain built on a legendary flavor memory starts losing that edge, the disappointment turns personal fast. This is not just about price. It is about expectation. People go to a chain like this expecting the kind of comfort food that feels deeply familiar and almost impossible to mess up. So when customers start scoring it lower on actual food quality, that is a major problem. The controversial part is that legacy food brands sometimes coast on the logo, while newer operators race ahead on execution, menu focus, or freshness perception. Customers may not use those exact terms, but they feel it. They say the chicken is not as craveable. They say the meal feels heavy in the wrong way. They say the sides feel like filler. They say the visit no longer feels like the easy yes it once was. That is what not worth it anymore looks like in plain English. Wendy's comes in at number 4 because the financial results line up almost too neatly with what many customers have been saying for a while. In the American Customer Satisfaction Index, it scored 75 in 2025, below the quick service average. Then the company's official full-year 2025 results showed U.S. same-restaurant sales down 5.6%, U.S. system-wide sales down 5.2%, and fourth-quarter U.S. same-restaurant sales down 11.3%. The company also said it was pushing a U.S. turnaround called Project Fresh and leaning harder into everyday value. That combination tells a story. This is a chain that knows it has to rebuild the case for why a stop here feels worth it. The hard part is that the brand still has strong menu recognition. People know what the burgers, fries, nuggets, and Frosties are supposed to deliver. So when visits feel thinner, slower, less hot, or less satisfying than memory says they should, the gap stands out immediately. There is also a basic fast food truth here that many people miss. Freshness is not a slogan. It is a promise that gets judged in seconds. Customers do not read an earnings release to decide whether they believe that promise. They taste it. And if too many customers stop believing it, the brand ends up doing exactly what this one is doing now, talking more about value, foundations, and turnaround. That language is not random. It usually means the product and experience equation has slipped far enough that the company itself knows it has work to do. TGI Fridays takes number 3 because bankruptcy is what happens when a chain's old image stops carrying the business. In early November of 2024, the company filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection. Reuters reported that it had closed about 50 locations in 2024 before the filing, and the Associated Press said the move accelerated the gradual decline of a chain that had once sat near the center of American pop culture, but had seen its customer base dwindle as tastes changed. That is about as clear as a brand obituary gets without actually being one. The reason this chain belongs so high on the list is that it was once built almost entirely on vibe. Big menu, big drinks, big casual energy. It sold the feeling that going out did not have to be fancy to feel like an occasion. But when the food underneath a concept like that starts feeling too standard, too reheated, too indistinct, the atmosphere alone cannot save it. In fact, the atmosphere can make the bill feel worse, because then customers are not just paying for food, they are paying for an idea that no longer lands. That is the real lesson here. Casual dining chains can survive changes in fashion. They can survive new competition. What they cannot survive forever is becoming a place people talk about in the past tense. Once the sentence becomes, "This used to be good," the brand is already in a knife fight with its own memory. And that is a fight very few chains win. Red Lobster is number 2 because few national chains have had their problems spill into public view this dramatically. In May of 2024, the company filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection after closing dozens of locations, saying it needed to simplify operations, close locations, and pursue a sale. Reuters later reported that the chain had already shut 93 locations before court approval of a restructuring plan in September of that year. And in 2026, the brand's new leadership signaled that more closures could still be possible as it reviewed the footprint again. That is not a small wobble. That is a brand trying to survive a historic reset. The reason this chain hit such a nerve is simple. Seafood is one of the hardest restaurant categories to fake with nostalgia. Customers want obvious value. They want portions that feel fair, freshness that feels believable, and cooking that feels careful. Once any of those start feeling shaky, the price becomes much harder to defend. And here is the controversial truth. The more a chain leans on famous menu promotions, the easier it is for customers to notice when the economics underneath stop making sense. At that point, every plate starts carrying extra suspicion. Is this worth it? Is this fresh enough? Is this portion right? Is this why I came? A brand like this can still recover, and the new ownership clearly wants to try. But the fall itself says everything. When a chain once known for affordable seafood ends up in bankruptcy while customers openly debate whether the meal still feels like a good deal, the trust damage is already massive. McDonald's is number 1 because no chain better captures the difference between being enormous and being loved. In the American Customer Satisfaction Index, it ranked last among major quick-service chains in 2025 with a score of 70. Around the same time, the ACSI noted that the company's U.S. comparable sales in 2024 grew just 0.2% as consumer pricing frustration affected sales. Then, in early 2026, the Associated Press reported that the company was leaning harder on value offers and said those efforts were helping it win back customers with household incomes of $45,000 or less, a group that had been drifting away from the brand. That is the giveaway. A chain this big does not scramble to repair value perception unless a huge chunk of the public has already decided the old equation no longer works. This is why the criticism feels so intense. People do not expect perfection here. They expect reliable fast food at a price that feels emotionally easy to say yes to. Once that breaks, every other weakness gets amplified. A smaller burger, fries that are only decent instead of great, breakfast that feels lighter than memory, a total at the screen that makes people pause. The chain is still a powerhouse. The business can recover, promotions can work, new menu items can hit. But none of that changes the main reason it sits at the top of this list. More than almost any other restaurant chain in America, it trained generations of customers to think of it as the default value meal. When those same customers start openly questioning whether it is worth it anymore, that is not just a rough patch. That is a cultural shift. The big takeaway is not that every meal at these chains is bad or that no one should ever eat at them again. It is that the old shortcuts for deciding where to eat are getting less reliable. Familiar logo, famous menu item, childhood memory, busy parking lot. None of that proves the current meal is worth the current price. The smartest move now is to watch for the signals. Falling satisfaction, store closures, turnaround language, bigger value pushes, remodel plans that quietly admit the old stores stopped selling themselves. When chains have to fight this hard to convince people they still deliver, that usually means customers were already feeling the slide. If this list hit a nerve, like the video, and in the comments tell me which chain disappointed you most and what item made you realize it was no longer worth the money. Then share this with someone who still orders on nostalgia.